Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm Dr. Mariam Hassan, and I welcome you all to the Bioethics session at the annual Shaukat Khanum Cancer Symposium. This year, our focus is going to be on clinical trials. Without further ado, I'll just start off with my introductory talk, where I introduce the objectives of the session, as well as the following discussion that we plan to cover today. So we'll start off with my opening talk. And then I'll introduce rest of the panelists and illustrated speakers who have joined us today and continue our discussion further.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. This is Dr. Mariam Hassan, and I welcome you all today at the Bioethics session at the annual Shaukat Khanum Cancer Symposium. So my talk is meant to be more of an introductory talk that introduces the audience to what we hope to cover during this next 2 hours. The focus of our clinical trials session is on where clinical trials are in Pakistan right now and where we need to be. And I hope that the discussion today leads us to some productive conclusions. In this session, and in my presentation over the next few minutes, I'll start off with discussing a little bit about the prerequisites for conducting clinical trials. But very importantly, my presentation, as well as the following presentations after me today, will focus greatly on how contextual factors impact research in lower middle income countries like Pakistan, and how our existing baseline context further shifted for us during a public health emergency and the impact it had on research in the country. We'll review a little bit about the clinical trial landscapes in Pakistan, and in our ensuing panel discussion, we will focus on the future of clinical trials for Pakistan. I'll start off a little bit about a story of 2 women that I was fortunate enough to meet. One is one of our trial patients, Arina Anjum. Obviously, I've changed her name for privacy concerns. I've always known her to be a very private person, so I have not used either her picture or her real name in this situation. But Alina Anjum could have been anyone. And I will divulge a little bit why I say that. This is actually a picture of a handmade mural that she gifted to us at the CTU at Shaukat Khanum. This was right after she had been diagnosed with brain metastasis. She was barely 50 when she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. She had a master's in fine arts, so a creative artist. And a very, I must say, a giving person, was always ready to give whatever she had to whatever she was doing. So as a trial participant, I must say that that I felt that her involvement was very, not only altruistic in general, but also very giving. Because she had stage 4 breast cancer when she was diagnosed, a delay in diagnosis had led to this, which is a fairly common story for women being diagnosed with breast cancer in Pakistan still. She was enrolled in one of our clinical trials that led to the approval of a drug for metastatic breast cancer that for the first time after many, many years had shown a survival benefit. So she was part of that research that led to that approval. However, both her diagnosis, the ensuing delay in diagnosis, followed by her disease progression, which was expected given the nature of her disease, and which eventually obviously led to an end of her trial participation as well. Her involvement in research pretty much ended there. And I did feel that even though she had a lot to give we didn't have as much opportunity to take as much back from her. We could not really utilize what she had to offer. I then also had the good fortune of meeting Maryse. I will not attempt to read her full name. Maryse was somebody who was diagnosed with Pompey's disease. She is a national of Netherlands. And she's somebody who was actually diagnosed when she was only 5. It's a rare neuromuscular degenerative disorder. And enzyme therapy has only come up as a treatment option in recent years. And Maryse is somebody who works from home while she receives this enzyme replacement therapy through a BiPAP machine. But she also travels light between countries with her 2 ventilators, their spare parts, a dry battery and a suitcase, and a couple of people also accompany her. Maryse is somebody who has been instrumental in ensuring access to highly costly enzyme replacement therapy in Netherlands. She has been somebody who has become a global voice for Pompey's disease. And this has led to the availability of this particular therapy for people suffering from this disease. Now, these stories differ differently, not because the diseases are different, but also because these women have existed in different parts of the world. And it is, I've spent few minutes on this story because it is very important to highlight that context matters. Where you are in the world is going to not only determine your access to healthcare or research, but also the outcome of any disease that you are affected with. About more than 2 decades ago, the Commission on Health Research for Development stated that for the most vulnerable people, the benefits of health research offer a potential for change that has actually largely gone untapped. And this led to the coining of the term the 1090 gap, which is that less than 10% of the world resources are being spent to address 90% of the world's burden of preventive mortality, which affects lower middle income countries. Sadly, more than 2 decades later, we cannot say that this 1090 gap is now perhaps 60-40. It's still there for most developing countries. Which begs the question that why is this not changing for developing countries? For us to understand this, it's important to know that how the health research profile of a country works. So for a robust equity-based health research profile, you need health research priorities to be defined locally. You need resources to do that research. You need research centers to produce that research. You need research networks and journals to package that research. And finally, and most importantly, there need to be ways in place that ensure that there is impact of this research on research-related policy making and further definition of health research priorities. But it goes without saying that all of this exists within certain context of politics, economy, geography, history, culture, and even law of a country. And lead us to say that this context is what is not conducive to ensuring an equity-based health research profile in developing country like Pakistan. I will not spend too much time on this detail because it goes without saying that all aspects of the health research profile for Pakistan, we cannot claim to be fully covered in all these aspects. So our health research profile is certainly not what it should be. It's better than what it was maybe 3 decades ago, but it's still not where we need it to be. So the focus of our session today is not going to be just a reflection of why things are not how they should be, but what can we do to change this? So to understand how this can be changed, we need to understand the basics of what does one need for research. So you need regulation and infrastructure, and you need people, and you need money. All of this again operates within the same context which I just mentioned. As regards regulations, we know that most medical research in the country is regulated. The medical fraternity in the country is regulated through the PMBC and now the Pakistan Medical Council, which has a code of ethics for practitioners, medical and dental practitioners. It also mentions GCP guidelines and research ethics. For clinical trials, we do have a Drug Regulatory Authority of Pakistan, which very recently developed these biostudy rules. The drug research rules were always there since 1978, but their clinical study committee formulated during the formulation of the biostudy rules 2017 established a licensing requirement for CRO site sponsors. This is a fairly recent requirement, which means that most of the centers conducting research prior to this were basically following their own procedures for this. This is certainly a welcome requirement. However, there are limitations to the kind of oversight that the CSC can exercise over the dozens, if not hundreds, of trial sites across the country, especially with the flourishing of the clinical trials industry in recent time. We do have an ethics governance system, and in some of the following speakers will talk about that, including a PHRC, which has now been merged with the National Institutes of Health. And our SAPM, Dr. Faisal Sultan, will also talk a little bit about that change. The NBC, which has an ethics review committee for research, is also the custodian for national level research and clinical trials being conducted in the country, and is a designated review body for those. We also have institutional IRBs or ethics review committees. However, that institutional regulation is also not without its challenges, and some of our invited speakers will talk about those as well. For infrastructure, you need academic centers or hospitals which conduct clinical trials. You need contract research organizations which can represent sponsors in a country. And you, of course, need sponsors which can be both academia and from the industry or even international. And you need logistics to, you need logistics in place to claim that you have the right kind of infrastructure in place. Because if you're planning to do a TB trial, yet your lab does not have a proper centrifuge for processing of sputum samples, no amount of buildings are going to cut it. A very important requirement for conducting research is the availability of human resource. For clinical trial, you need physician investigators, and you need study coordinators who support those. You need members from regulatory bodies and ethics review boards, and even research nurses and pharmacists. I don't think I need to drive home the fact that these are often not recognized professions. Most of the time, these roles are being played by people who have other stuff to do also. And it is this lack of focus track for clinical trial teams and people working in clinical trials that also sometimes leads to perhaps what we can call a compromise on the quality of work. And then, of course, you need people who can provide money for all of this. There are several sources, but if you look at the bulk of research being conducted in the country, most of the work being done is directed by the funding bodies that are covering for that work or are providing for that work. And they are either industry or international or local funding bodies with very limited local funding options. All of this again operates within this context of political instability and resource restrictions and a tiered healthcare system, a low literacy rate, inconsistent regulations, a largely hierarchical society, and limited training for both research methodology and ethics. So I think I've driven home considerably in detail that context matter. And within this context of health research profile in a resource limited setting, when you're stuck with a public health emergency where you need robust evidence swiftly, you need to then change your gears very, very quickly also. So what we hope to discuss today is perhaps a reflective review of where we are right now. Some of the upcoming changes that Pakistan has been fortunate enough to be able to implement, learning from similar experiences across the country, as our various CTU directors and other stakeholders share their experience, especially during the COVID-19, of doing research during the COVID-19 pandemic, and a way to continue this dialogue amongst the stakeholders for clinical trials in Pakistan. I thank you all. Please stay tuned for more. Note down your questions for the end. After the following presentations, we hope to have a lively panel discussion leading to one of the first clinical trial declarations for Pakistan, which will be circulate amongst our partner institutions following this session.
Okay, so with this introductory talk, we then move on to our next speaker, Professor Amir Jaffri. Professor Amir Jaffri is a professor of bioethics at Center of Biomedical Ethics and Culture at SIUT, which is one of the first dedicated bioethics teaching center in Pakistan. They are also a designated WHO coordinating center. Professor Amir Jaffri is the son of the legendary poet Ada Jaffri, who is also known as the First Lady of Poetry in Pakistan. He's somebody who has, following his own training in bioethics, who has played a crucial role in developing a capital for bioethics in the country. So Dr. Amir Jaffri talk is going to be focused on the ethical regulation of clinical trials in Pakistan. And we'll start off with his talk first.
Assalamu alaikum. It is a privilege to be invited to this important conference to share my thoughts. The topic that I have been given is ethics governance of research mechanisms in Pakistan. Before I begin, I must point out that even though I'm a member of the National Bioethics Committee and also of the Clinical Studies Committee of DRAP, both of these overlook research governance in the country, my views expressed today in this meeting are my own entirely and do not represent my official position in either of these two national committees. So I will be talking about the governance mechanisms at institutional level and also at the national level, looking specifically at NBC, the National Bioethics Committee, and the Clinical Studies Committee of DRAP, both mandated to look at the ethics governance in the country. I'll talk about the strengths and weaknesses of these mechanisms in place, and I will end by giving a few suggestions. I am basing much of this talk on a study that we were mandated to do, invited to do by the EMRO office of WHO for mapping research ethics governance in Pakistan. It was a pilot study of a situational analysis in Pakistan. So in Pakistan, the sequence is such that all research supposed to be reviewed at the institutional level by the local ethical review committee, also called IRB. And once it is approved by the institutional committee, it goes to the National Bioethics Committee's Research Ethics Committee. The Research Ethics Committee meets and approves it, and only then does it go to the DRAP Clinical Studies Committee, which then approves the study site first, and then the study itself in a clinical trial situation will be approved. And only then can the journey of the research actually start. So these are the 4 steps involved in Pakistan at the moment. At the institutional level, while we have ethical review committees now mushrooming across the country, we have actually no idea how many there are. And we have no idea about their strengths and their abilities. There is wide variation in the quality of review. The Office of Human Research Protection, HRP, of the NIH of the US government has a registry where we can have our committees registered, and 57 committees from Pakistan are registered over there right now. And 23 actually are right now mentioned over there, but deactivated. About 10 years ago, we had something like 15 committees mentioned over there and a few deactivated. So this number is increasing, but this is not actual reflection of the real number of such committees in Pakistan. At the national level, we have in place the Research Ethics Committee of the National Bioethics Committee, which is in function since 2004. The NBC was created under the umbrella of the Ministry of Health at that time, the Federal Ministry of Health. And it was placed within the Pakistan Health Research Council, called Pakistan Medical Research Council at that time, which was acting as its secretariat. It has two committees. The NBC has two committees: a Research Ethics Committee and a Healthcare Ethics Committee. The Research Ethics Committee has been mandated to look at certain types of human subject research. We also have, technically speaking, provincial bioethics committees notified in all the provinces, on paper at least. Then we have the Clinical Studies Committee under the Drug Regulatory Authority of Pakistan, DRAP, since 2019, actually mandated only in September of 2019. So this is a relatively new committee. Again, looking at research governance in Pakistan. So the NBC domain includes all research on human subjects, fetal materials, embryos, human tissue, meeting the criteria, which is whether it is externally funded for any research to be done anywhere in Pakistan, or any foreign funded research to be done in Pakistan, or funded by the government of Pakistan, or it is a multi-province research. All of these, including all clinical trials, will go to the NBC for review. The Clinical Studies Committee of DRAP has a domain which looks at only clinical trials and all clinical trials. Not only that, it also accreditates all clinical trial sites, all bioequivalence centers, bioanalytical labs, and all contract research organizations. So this accreditation process did not exist before 2019. So this is a very important function, in addition to looking at all clinical trials of the CSC of DRAP. In the pandemic times, many things changed. The NBC, by March 2020, realizing that there will be an onslaught of research related to the pandemic, developed what was called the Guidelines for Rapid Turnaround Review, modeling it on the WHO draft document, which was at that time still a draft document of rapid research ethics review during public health emergencies, suggested standard operating procedures for national research ethics committees. This was, I happened to be a reviewer of this, so I knew that this was in existence, and we looked at it and we modeled our own rapid turnaround review system based on the WHO document. The CSC of DRAP moved to a more sporadic online meetings schedule from the physical meetings that was initially being done in the latter part of 2019. But after the pandemic, they moved to these online meetings, but they are done quite sporadically. The National Ethics Committee was actually meeting up to 3 times a week, because they had a 72-hour turnaround time. A project would come to them, and within 72 hours, a decision had to be made. So that meant online meetings happening every twice, maybe thrice a week, which is now gone down to once a week and sometimes even twice a week. So NBC meets every 2 weeks now, maximum of a gap of 2 weeks, or even every week, at 10 p.m. online on a Tuesday evening. The challenges that we have had and that we are facing right now, as far as the NBC's mechanism is concerned, a major issue is that of stewardship. The last meeting of the NBC, which was chaired by the patron, which is the Minister of Health or the SAPM of Health, was held in January of 2019, and that was held after a 3-year gap. And we have had no such meeting afterwards, after that. All we've had is a multitude of research ethics committee meetings to review research, but no National Bioethics Committee meeting under the patronage of its patron. So that's an important gap that exists. We have stagnation of membership. Many of our members have outlived their membership cycle, but are still there because the new elections have not taken place. We have a very clear mechanism of getting new members, but that has not had a chance to take place because of the pandemic. Even before that, it was not actually taking place. So there is stagnation. There is secretarial support on paper, but it is limited because all these individuals, there are 4 or 5 people actually designated with some of these tasks, but they are all full-time employees of the Pakistan Health Research Council, which is now moved under the National Institute of Health Pakistan. They're all full-time employees doing something else, and this is a side activity for them. So NBC has no permanent secretarial or dedicated secretarial help. Now, these individuals help a lot, but this is over and beyond what they're doing already full-time at the NIH. We have provincial bioethics committees, but they are lost without a trace. They were all functional at some level or the other a few years ago, but since the NBC, to which they were reporting, is not actually functional as an NBC with physical or even virtual meetings, at PBCs are actually also not really functional. The CSC draft is disorganized at best. The meetings happen sporadically. Even the members don't know when the meeting will take place, and suddenly you get a notice that a meeting is taking place day after tomorrow. And when you line up, the meeting is actually not taking place also. It's poorly organized, but it is very powerful. It has the power to stop research, to not mandate the research proposal going forward. It has the power to actually stop research in its track if there is any breach of protocol. But there are many domains that are overlapping of the CSC with the NBC, including the ethical review process. And the members are not very clear as far as the CSC is concerned as to where their mandate ends and where the NBC mandate takes over. So there are no clinical trial registry mechanisms available in Pakistan. We are asked to register with the US.gov trial registry, but we don't have a local Pakistani trial registry, which should be there, especially with the mushrooming research that is taking place in the past 2-3 years related to COVID. There is a lack of knowledge and ignorance about research governance at an institutional level also. There's a lack of mapping. We really don't know how many ERCs exist in Pakistan, and we certainly don't know what quality of research review is taking place over there, because there is no accreditation at the central level. So the ERCs may exist, but we don't know their quality. We don't know their numbers. We don't know their mandate. There is also no mandate for ethical review training requirements for these ERC members, which is extremely important all over the world, but there is no such requirement at the national level for all these institutional committees. Yes, there are institutional committees that mandate it for themselves, but the vast majority do not. It's an on-the-job training. There is a major overlap between the NBC's mandate and the DRAP's mandate, and which actually duplicates things and also prolongs the research review process, which needs to be looked at. So we need to develop a way forward, which basically means we have to have a trial registry where we can actually register all the activity that is going on as far as research is concerned in Pakistan. We also need a very good, robust ERC mapping in the country. And not only that, we need to have the NBC, and the NBC is, I think, the best forum to have an accreditation process for all ERCs in Pakistan, so that we know how many ERCs there are there and their level, so that we can actually maintain a status of standard across the country for all the ERCs. The NBC itself has to be more robust with a tangible governmental support. So we have a patron, but no patronage for many, many years now. It's kind of hovering around. First, we were lodged under in the PHRC as the secretarial setup. Now we have moved into the NIH, but we have to have an active secretariat with dedicated staff, because there is a lot of work that is required, not just paper pushing or just forwarding emails, but also a lot of analytical work. So we require a secretariat that is dedicated, and we also require a patronage that is hands-on, so that the NBC according to its TOR, continues to function and remain active and functional. Not just its functional arm, which is the research ethics review mechanism, but everything else that is also under its mandate. We also have to do some rethinking for DRAP and its clinical studies committee, which are to, if they are to align with the governance goals, we have to do away with duplication. So there's a lot of activity that actually we can do and move forward with our work that we are doing for research governance in Pakistan. We've come a long way, ladies and gentlemen, but there is still a long way to go. The pandemic has taught us a lot. And I think we have increased our capacity to do research, review. We have increased the capacity for research governance, but this has to be streamlined now so that we make it even better for non-COVID related activity also. And we make it more easy for our researchers and our various research institutes to be able to utilize these functions. So thank you once again for this opportunity to share my thoughts, and I would look forward to a good, robust question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amir, for your insightful talk, which highlights the importance of regulation, harmonization, and standardization in the country, as well as the importance of stewardship at a national level. We now move on to the trial sites perspective, what happens at the ground level. And we have two really important perspectives from one of the two most, what I would call strong clinical trial sites in the country. Joining us firstly live is Professor Saeed Hamid. He's a professor of medicine and a consultant gastroenterologist at Adil Khan University Hospital and a clinical trials unit director there as well. And he's somebody who has been instrumental in not only care provision, but also in education and research conduct in that institution as well as in Pakistan. So we look forward to hearing from Professor Saeed Hamid. His talk is going to be focusing on the rapid capacity building that is needed, especially in public health emergencies for conducting research. Over to you, Professor Saeed Hamid.
Thank you, Dr. Mariam, for this, first of all, for this initiative, and secondly, for the kind introduction. I have a brief presentation. I did not make a formal presentation because I wanted these to be discussion points rather than a didactic lecture. So I'll just touch upon a few things that I think are important, and I hope that we can cover this in the discussion session, which I look forward to. This is my disclosure. As you mentioned, I am the director of the clinical trials unit at the AKU, and therefore involved in running COVID vaccine and therapeutic clinical trials. However, the presentation today doesn't really impact on these disclosures. Okay, so as has been said, COVID-19 has been a boon for research all over the world, including to some extent Pakistan, maybe not to the extent that we would have liked, but certainly we have been part of it and we remain a part of it, which is important and critical. If you look at the clinicaltrials.gov, which is the NIH clinical trials registry site, you find nearly 7,000 studies for COVID-19. Now, these studies are not all clinical trials. Of course, these can be anything from basic bench research, well, not really bench research, but this could be clinical studies and so on and so forth. If you look at the WHO's International Clinical Trials Registry platform, they have nearly 5,500 studies in their database. Importantly, this does not include those listed on the clinicaltrials.gov. Actually, they add up into that number. So a huge amount of things being churned out at a very rapid pace, clinical trials taking place. It seems that the world was almost ready for this pandemic, and as soon as it started, people saw the opportunity and really went to work in all these areas. there have been 220,000 research papers published in 2021, according to Google Scholar, which is again should be some sort of a record. We hear that there's about 2.5 million publications per year. So this makes about 5 to 10% of all publications on every health-related topic on just COVID-19. So you can imagine the amount of work that people have been engaged in and so on. So as I said, many of these studies are clinical, vaccines, therapeutics, prophylaxis, diagnostics. So there's been a whole range of studies that have been done. Now, amongst all this mayhem, one would step back and think: has this speed and fervor done something which may be not so welcome in this situation? And so this is an initial report from one of the from Dr. Riesnick from the NIH, who was speaking to us the other day in the Department of Medicine Research Day. And one of his slides mentioned that there has been no increase in retractions. By retractions, of course, you mean that a manuscript is submitted to a journal and then retracted for various reasons. Not always for misconduct, but it could be for other reasons as well. For example, dispute for authorship, for example, some incorrect data which has been put in there, etc., etc. So there has been, unfortunately, there's been no increase in retractions that have been noted during the pandemic. And this is taken as one of the measures of research misconduct and not the only measure. However, these retractions, whatever have happened, have gained more prominence because of the nature of the subject. So you may remember that there was an NAGM paper which was dealing with hydroxychloroquine as a prophylaxis, or maybe even as initial treatment. I can't really remember. And this was done by a CRO, and the data was very questionable. And this raised a hue and cry, and this paper was retracted. And the hue and cry was that one, the Journal of New England Journal of Medicine stature decided to publish this paper and then retracted it. So it's difficult to say that there has been, and lately we've heard about the Pfizer vaccine data. I haven't gone into the details of that yet, so I haven't put this up there. But there are now question marks about that, about some of it at least. Okay, so I'm going to focus my talk on vaccines mainly because this has been the largest trials that we've been involved in. Everybody knows this. There are a number of vaccines that are either have been approved or are in late development. So I don't need to go into that. If you look at the WHO list from 29th of October 2020, 45 candidate vaccines are mentioned there. In fact, the number has now gone over 200. Coupled with Operation Warp Speed, which brought us the Pfizers and the Modernas of this world, and actually got registered as emergency use by December. We have a really supercharged adrenaline-filled mix, which is going on right now. So there are, needless to say, a lot of clinical vaccines in clinical trials, still subunit vaccines, viral vector vaccines, some mRNA vaccines, and others, and so on. So we've not heard the last of vaccine trials. In fact, this may be just the beginning. We've changed focus now. We used to, the start was, of course, randomized placebo-controlled trials. But now the focus seems to be on finding delivery methods more than or robust immunological boosting and so on. So booster trials are in fashion right now, and they have taken over the vaccine trial business. The First COVID-19 vaccine trial that came to Pakistan was, of course, the ConSino Bio, which is an adenovector delivered spike protein vaccine. This started in October 2020 to late October 2020. The total enrollment in the country was 18,000. Our target was 18,000 out of for about 6 or 7 or 8 maybe centers all across the country. This was a stiff target. Were we prepared for this? Absolutely, we were not, because this, as I said, the speed of these things is so phenomenous that it is difficult to be prepared for anything like this. This was the largest sample size that we had dealt with in certainly in the CTU at AKU in a very compressed time frame. So the the target was to enroll these patients in 3 months because there was a race to get to the finish line as early as possible. They were because of this rush to deliver. There were frequent changes to the protocol and procedures, which were troublesome to the team because every time there was a change, you would have to go back to the ERC and to the NBC and say, okay, these are changes in the protocol, that please accept these. And for those periods of time, sometimes we had to hold the trial for a little bit until we got the protocols, the amendments approved and so on. And all this, of course, was because there was a rush to get this vaccine out there as soon as possible. Not a bad thing because I think the world needed it, the country needed it, but still it was very unusual to the pace that we have been used to in our clinical trials, in our regular clinical trials. So what did we need to shoulder this responsibility? And it was a responsibility because this was the first vaccine study with the intended outcome of this being locally, at least partly manufactured and being locally available as soon as the results were declared and as soon as the draft gave them emergency use authorization, which is, I'm glad to say, has happened, and they are now co-producing it within Pakistan, which is great. So what did we need? We need quick regulatory approvals. We obviously needed a volunteer database. We needed to enhance capacity of our facility immediately. We needed a very good number of trained study staff. We needed strategies to tackle large numbers of data points and follow-ups. We were never used to this amount of data that was flowing in, weekly follow-ups, telephone calls, this, that, and the other. It amounted to a lot of work. We needed better coordination between various trial sites because there were things going on that we had to share experiences with. And we needed to, of course, fulfill stringent requirements of international regulatory agencies. For example, we were one of the sites that was inspected by the Chinese FDA for this. Did we have any of those available? We did have some of these things available, but we lacked in all the other things. So how did we enhance capacity? At least in our unit, there are 2 organizations that I would bring to your notice. One is called PATH, which is Program for Appropriate Technologies in Health, and the other one is CEPI, which is Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation. Both of them give grants to enhance capacity for clinical trials units, and I believe this program may still be open. Anyway, we were lucky. We applied to PATH for a grant. There was a reasonable amount of money for enhancing our capacity, which we spent in increasing our freezer space, our pharmacy fridge space, our clinical unit space, our softwares, our hardwares, and so on and so forth. And so that was very helpful. It was timely and it was helpful. As Amir has mentioned, the local ERCs, the NBC, and the DRAP all played their role, and I think one has to appreciate this. The local ERCs were really working hard to clear all the COVID-related stuff as soon as possible, as quickly as possible. So was the NBC, and so was the draft. So we did not have much to complain about in terms of the fast tracking of these proposals. We will talk about the duplication that Amir has mentioned in our discussion session, which I think is important to counter. We certainly need more fully licensed clinical trial sites across the country, because the funny part is that sometimes these sites are licensed only for a particular trial. That's what's mentioned in the draft database. They're not mentioned for generalized clinical trials, and therefore that becomes a roadblock sometimes, because when you go back to these sites, try and get them engaged in the clinical research, you find out that do not have an approval for any clinical trial to be performed. Quality controls is again something that has been alluded to already, and this is something that we need to work on. What do we need going forward? I think automation always helps where there are a number of loops through both. So RERCs have now an almost totally automated submission and approval and correspondence mechanisms. Time is not wasted on filling in forms physically and so on, and then transferring those forms over across. So that has been a real improvement in our ERCs. The NBC system has also worked very well. I think their automation does work. You can apply online and you can get a quick answer, and so this is good. DRAP needs to be more automated and more organized. The clinical studies is really a bit of a mess at the moment. So, and we'll discuss that. We need a network of interconnected CTUs, and I think this effort today will help us in doing that. For the future, we need, and this is not really directly related to a pandemic, but we need disease-specific consortium, which is where the world is going or has gone for a long time. Consortium in oncology, in GI, in maternal child health, in vaccines, etc., etc. We need to think about creating a cadre of well-trained research staff within the country. So these are certified clinical research professionals from good institutions who can handle and do the job. There should be some internal funding mechanisms for multi-center national studies, which may be important to us. Right now, we are dependent basically on international grants and sponsors. I think money can be found within our own mechanisms where we can do this. I know for a fact that DRAP has a fair amount of money lying around for this purpose, and maybe when Faisal Sultan comes on the line, we might be able to ask him. So just to conclude, Pakistan has great potential to participate in international clinical trials of relevance, I would say, which is important, which is key. But for this purpose, we need to market Pakistan internationally for this purpose. And I think we've got all the ingredients. We've got some of them need to be streamlined, some of the processes need to be streamlined, but we have excellent clinicians, we have excellent investigators, we have a huge amount of patient population in various disease states, and that is what we need to be capitalized on. Our patients stand to benefit from some of these large registration studies, as Mariam showed some examples, and everybody can share some examples where patients would not have been exposed to these new vaccines which are going for registration and which would have really played a great role in their earlier recovery, were they getting the real drug and getting to participate in these. So with that, I'll stop, and I'll be happy to contribute to the question and answer sessions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Saeed Hamid, for a powerhouse presentation. I think it's great to see that your presentation also highlights the same set of themes that continue to emerge from all presentations so far. The importance of quality and quantity of research in a pandemic when we are pushed to do research in a race against time. The challenges of dealing with adaptive design research studies and the need for harmonization of the research review process, both ethics and regulatory. And finally, and most importantly, the importance of people within Pakistan who are doing research, talking to each other, and coming together for research-related capacity building initiatives in non-pandemic situations. Because if our non-pandemic baseline does not change, we will not be able to deal with future outbreaks of such nature. So with that, I move on to another powerful presentation by Dr. Naila Ansari. Dr. Naila Ansari is an epidemiologist and a chair for research at the Indus Hospital and Health Network in Karachi, Pakistan. She is somebody who is really passionate about research and a true lady of science, I must say. We have worked together as participating sites in more than one clinical trials, and I hope that with her presentation, we'll learn a lot today as well. So we'll start off with Dr. Naila Ansari's presentation.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Naila Ansari, and I'm the chair of research at the Indus Hospital and Health Network. Thank you for inviting me to speak from the perspective of a trial site today. While preparing this talk, I decided to do a quick review of the number of trials registered with the popular clinicaltrials.gov registry. As you can see, to date, the South Asian region has contributed to less than 2% of the studies. And within South Asia, nearly 70% of the studies registered are from India, followed by 20% from Pakistan. To date, approximately 1,300 research studies have Pakistan listed as a trial country. The oldest study I found was registered in 1993, but it took nearly 25 years for the registrations to cross the 100 study mark in 2018. Since then, there's been a steady rise in studies, with over 500 listing 2021 as their start year. Currently, around 345 studies are listed as active, that is, they're in various stages of recruitment, follow-up, awaiting recruitment, etc. Approximately 75 active studies are classified as either a phase 1, 2, 3, or 4 clinical trials. In the past 2 years, 55 COVID-19 studies have been registered, with 22 still ongoing. As expected, the most research robust cities are Karachi, followed by Lahore, Islamabad, and Rawalpindi. Given my talk pertains to a trial site experience during the pandemic, I want to give you a quick background about research at Indus. In 2007, when the hospital was established, the research center also started functioning with a focus on public health and community-based initiatives. Within a few years, our management made a conscientious decision that ethical research training would become the norm, not an exception at Indus. So anyone at Indus, whether faculty or resident conducting human subject research, had to be certified. And our IRB was officially registered with the US Office of Human Research Protection. At the research center, we're a small team of epidemiologists, research associates, and managers who help our clinicians navigate through the various aspects of research. We provide epidemiological and statistical consults, help in proposal development, offer data management services, and also help with grant preparation and management. Essentially, we are the research resource hub at Indus. Among other things, the best thing to happen for clinical trials in Pakistan has been the pandemic. In one swoop, the playing field has essentially expanded and forced sponsors to find new players. It's been Indus's lucky break too, when both Sinopharm's phase 1 as well as CanSino Bio's phase 3 vaccine trials landed in our lab. People are under the impression that Indus has been a bigwig in clinical trials for a while, and that is not quite the case. To give you perspective, out of the nearly 500 studies registered from Karachi since 1995, 188 were from AKU, 52 from Dow, 20 from Jinnah, and just 17 from Indus, half of which were our own internal investigator-initiated trials. So in the next few slides, I'm going to give a quick overview of some key aspects of what we experienced, starting with what helped us. First and foremost, it helped that we had a research culture in existence and an established research center with all the mechanism needed to run sponsored clinical trials. It also helped that we had a good rapport with other departments. So when the time crunch happened, it was a collective effort by everyone to find space, facilitate setting up the COVID-19 vaccine trial, and help meet the inspection requirements. Obviously, the enthusiasm and excitement of the sponsors, CROs, was infectious, to say the least. Their meticulous attention to detail, thorough documentation was an eye-opener to most of the team members. They enjoyed the interaction and the opportunity to learn and experience something at a global level. Another important aspect not given enough importance is the selection of a site PI. We were lucky to be working with PIs who, despite being busy clinicians, were totally committed to the trial. They understood their roles and responsibilities and the process that needed to be followed to maintain scientific and, above all, ethical integrity of the trial. What baffled us externally was the regulations. No one seemed to know when and what to submit to NBC draft and in which order. Communication channels seemed very person-dependent and bureaucratic. Getting clear responses in writing was just a dream. This aspect was probably one of the most painful and frightful part of our experience. Compounded with that was the pressure to hurry up. For example, the impression was that if NBC has already approved the study, then not much can be done with the suggestions made by our site, IRB. Example, in one study, we were handed documents to submit without any Urdu consent. When we said our IRB would not approve without an Urdu consent form, there was pressure that other sites have already done so, and so has NBC. It just seemed to trivialize the site process, which we couldn't understand. Luckily, we stood our ground and a translation was eventually provided to us. Obviously, this had been an oversight, but it made us realize the important role of sites keeping check and balances of the process. As we sought the trial, we wondered why there was no national trial participant registry. With multiple sites offering incentive for vaccination, how would we stop one person enrolling with Indus and then going across to the other site or participating in another vaccine trial? What baffled us internally was the realization that poor understanding of DRAP's clinical trial site guidelines had led us to form silos of information within our organization. Research teams were afraid to share information on how they got DRAP approval, lest something went wrong with their approval process. With every sponsor approaching DRAP in a different way, there was inconsistency and lack of clarity in the process. The internal lack of communication also made us realize that we only had a specific area approved for conducting clinical trials instead of an overarching one. Simultaneously, another sponsor started pressurizing us to get our ICUs approved as a clinical trial site for DRAP. Working through this comedy of errors, we realized our challenge was to stop these silos and officially form a clinical trial unit and get it DRAP approved for all clinical trial research that takes place anywhere at Indus. For this, we needed to find a place away from the regular patient footfall, since the vaccine trial had healthy volunteers. The solution came when our CEO offered we use 6 of the 24 containers being built on one of our parking lots as a COVID extension. Another issue that baffled us was participant incentives and our finance department's inability to keep pace with the participant influx and cash flow. This seemed to be a common problem across sites, where traditional finance mechanisms were not in tune with the need of large trials. Many of us resorted to giving a personal cash loan so that the trial team did not have to face an embarrassing situation with the participants. Even with the cooperative finance, there are limitations that require thinking out of the box when you commit to taking on large trials. What worked for us? Well, quite a bit. Foremost, our team's integrity, grit, and flexibility. For one of the vaccine trials, Indus was the last site to be invited. Almost felt like it was a by the way, let's invite Indus stance. And this was coupled with the pressure to again hurry up our processes. It seemed a bit unfair, but our team wasn't intimidated or afraid to ask questions, point out mistakes, and we definitely were not willing to let things slide to save time. And that's when a strong PI backing the team comes in handy too. It also helped that we had been working with an IRB with proper procedures laid out and knew we couldn't cut corners. Something else that worked for us was our ability to observe and adapt. For example, we quickly shifted to Excel sheets at the front desk when we realized some people were trying to enroll multiple times. Or we developed a robust verification system when SIMs were coming switched off on follow-up calls. Our team started joking that they'd become detectives sleuthing to prevent conmen from enrolling. We also, with our observation, we also realized that we needed to have a participant central flow rather than a team convenient flow. Our patient population required it to be such. We observed that the participants were getting confused as to which room to go to and where to wait. So after consent, several participants began to sit in one room, and the various history, vital, vaccination teams all came to them. This helped calm the participants and also prevented unnecessary movement in an already small space. Finally, what really worked and should be a norm is sharing knowledge and lessons learned in real time with other sites. The WhatsApp group of all key people in one of the trials helped solve many issues and made others learn from their experiences. Another trial that we were part of didn't have something along those lines, and it created frustration within our team. Now, the trial site, what would we like to see in the future? For one, the trial participants' role needs to be recognized by the government. With the availability of vaccines, it seems our trial participants were forgotten as the national heroes that they were. Every threat made of SIM closure, withholding of salary of non-vaccinated individuals resulted in our trial participants suffering because they were never mentioned as being exempted from the policies. It also resulted in people leaving the trial, getting vaccinated without telling the trial sites, and just confusion. Just unnecessary angst, not to mention waste of effort, money, and science. We also think that there is a need to establish a trial participant registry in NADRA. With more trials coming our way, especially booster vaccines, trial sites need a comprehensive database to check vaccination status. Currently, NADRA doesn't list all the vaccines people have gotten, and we know that people have been polyvaccinated even before NCOC regulations came out about boosters. For example, if someone got Moderna in Karachi before the NCOC booster rules came out, and on top of their initial Sinopharm, it doesn't show up in the NADRA system. Instead, it's present in the Sindh Health Department vaccine database only. So as a trial site, we need to check two databases in order to get the true status of a participant. Essentially, databases, just like human beings, need to be able to speak with one another and share information. We also need clear statement of processes and professional communication by everyone, especially the regulatory bodies overseeing clinical trials. Industry and academic support in setting up of CTUs. Most of us have had no idea what is the optimal size of a CTU, essential equipment, rooms required, configuration, number of teams, and we've just winged it while we set up our own. In conclusion, where there's a will, there's a way. Indus's clinical research unit was established in 6 containers. In the 4th wave, we got evicted on 2 days' notice and moved to smaller containers during the middle of crucial recruitment closing. Anyhow, we survived and are still functioning with a smile and looking forward to conducting more trials. I'd like to thank our team for the wonderful work they've done in making all of this possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Naila, for a fantastic presentation, which once again highlights the importance of communication with all stakeholders, including trial participants, people working on research. And I think you make a wonderful point about the ownership of a particular study by the relevant principal investigator. The role of communication at all levels to address the issues of silos being created within an organization or at a country level even. I think these are very important points, and as we move forward to our declaration, we will certainly cover these. We now move on to a presentation by the Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on Health, Pakistan, Dr. Faisal Sultan. Dr. Faisal, his name needs no introduction. He's an infectious diseases specialist and also was the CEO for Shaukat Khanum Cancer Hospitals from 2003 till 2020. He's currently serving the government for managing our healthcare. In his presentation, he's going to be focusing on what the government response has been in reimagining research in the country. So we'll start off with his presentation.
Assalamu alaikum. First of all, let me thank you, the organizers, for the symposium and for this session, for inviting me to share my thoughts. I will be talking about the role and intervention from the federal government's level to help in fostering the process of research and its conduct in Pakistan. As you may know, after the 18th Amendment, a lot of the health operational aspects, which include delivery of care, were devolved to the provincial entities. The federal or the National Ministry of Health Services Regulation and Coordination has primarily to do with coordination and regulation as well as parts of research. In that context, the following important interventions have been done and are planned to be implemented in the coming weeks and months. First and foremost, the old PMRC, the Pakistan Medical Research Council, which then had been transformed into the PHRC, the Pakistan Health Research Council, has been merged into the new National Institute of Health as one of the 7 institutes which are contained within, and it is called the Health Research Institute. It has 2 fundamental roles to play. First is oversight of research as far as the ethical aspects are concerned and which relate to the protection of human subjects. This oversight role had already been taken up by the old PMRC and PHRC, and therefore in many ways it is a continuation of that oversight role. While it is important to have an oversight role, care must be taken and will be taken that this role is of a nature which provides protection to human subjects of research, but at the same time is a mechanism which fosters good and ethical research. The second aspect of the new Health Research Institute is provision of research grants. Good research very often requires some and at times substantial amounts of money, and therefore the old provisions for support of research have generally been inadequate. To fix that, a research fund, in fact a fund at the NIH which can also help in fostering research, has been put in law, and as money comes into it, it will provide for adequate funding of research proposals. The way this would be done is through a method of ranking of research proposals in terms of the quality of work, its relevance, and impact, and other factors that the Health Research Institute leadership will determine. But the focus would be on enabling good research to happen, and often in directions where it is required for national decision making at times, but also to ensure that those projects and ideas that are of a high quality and caliber do not get ignored, even if they are of a more esoteric nature. This balance will have to be created by bodies of experts and subcommittees that look and review and score all these research projects. So that is the broad idea of intervention as far as the Health Research Institute is concerned. The other area that I wish to talk about a little bit is the Drug Regulatory Authority of Pakistan and the DRAP, to the extent of conducting trials, or to the extent of reviewing trials that have a future impact or have a future potential impact on registration of a particular product, would have a role. But outside of that, the oversight role would remain with the institutions initially, and of course as far as the ethical or IRB part of oversight is concerned, with the Health Research Institute. We are also trying to ensure that while this fostering and oversight and helping of the research endeavor is going on, it is of a nature and type that is facilitative and helpful and creates the environment in which new and experienced researchers can do their work and can conduct research of a high quality. There is also the possibility of bringing in additional money through contributory funds and taxes, which of course are subject to eventual approval by the relevant legislative bodies before they can be put in, but that is a potential source for funding some of the research ideas and proposals that come through. Some of the lessons that we learnt in COVID have to do with the fact that in many situations in the past, very often for registration trials and for bringing in new products, what we have depended upon are trials conducted elsewhere and authorizations of use provided by what are called stringent regulatory authorities from other countries. For example, in the United States, the FDA, or entities in the EU or the United Kingdom, and other such more established and stringent regulatory entities. What we saw in COVID was that we were presented with authorizing the use of products that may not have gone through those processes simply because of geopolitical reasons, as well as the sheer pace at which things were evolving. So for example, we had to authorize the use of vaccines manufactured in China that had not gone through, for example, the WHO approval process at that time. And so our own mechanisms, both of review of the scientific data thus presented, as well as those of the products themselves, had to be brought in. So one of the areas that we will have to build our capacity is to be able to, with authority and scientific rigor, the ability to certify the safety, effectiveness and appropriateness of medicines, of pharmaceuticals, of biologics, of vaccines and so on, as well as of medical equipment. So our own regulatory framework will have to upgrade and go through a transformation to be able to do this, and not just be simply recertifying what has been certified by another solid entity. So this upgradation of our regulator will require a redo of the drug regulatory and the device regulatory regime in Pakistan and how it is conducted. And so some legislation will be coming through on this aspect as well. These are some of the important interventions that we feel will have a clear impact on the conduct of good quality trials which are ethical and which follow the broader guidelines as well as the global guidance on how trials should be conducted, and at the same time foster the conduct of trials by ensuring that those people, those individuals or institutions that come out with great ideas are not left to languish for lack of funds and good trials going to waste either because of money or because of bureaucratic red tape. So these are some of the interventions that will take place. Some of these have already taken place, and the idea is that we at the national ministry use the levers that are available to us to ensure that this that Pakistan actually continues to produce research that is of a continuously higher level and higher quality and greater impact. I'm grateful to you all for your patience. Thank you very much.
A great concise talk by Dr. Faisal. What is really heartening to see, and it comes at no surprise, is the commitment at leadership level to for ethical high quality research. And I think this point cannot be emphasized enough. And a very welcome initiative regarding provision of funding for clinical trials and locally relevant research in the country. With this, we have come to the end of presentations from people from within Pakistan. We now move on to our last presentation for today by Professor Trudy Lang. Professor Trudy Lang is a professor of global health research and the health of global health network and a senior research scientist at University of Oxford. She's somebody who established the global health network, which has played a key role in capacity development for research in many lower middle income countries, and is really passionate about this cause. And she will share her experience of working with lower middle income countries in this arena. So we start off with her presentation, and following this presentation, we will then move on to the discussion on the first ever clinical trials declaration for Pakistan.
Many thanks for the invitation to talk today, and I'm really pleased to take you through the topic of research capacity development. And so my name is Trudy Lang. I'm Professor of Global Health Research at the University of Oxford, and I have been supporting the Global Health Network for the past 12 years. And so I'm going to talk to you about why we set up the Global Health Network and our approach to capacity building, and just share some thoughts and ideas around why we all need to get involved with this and what we can do better in terms of supporting more health research in every corner of the globe. So if we go back a really long time to 2013, the WHO said that if the lowest income countries across the globe are ever to really tackle the diseases that affect their communities, then these countries need to lead and drive their own health research. And here we are, just hopefully coming towards the end of this awful global pandemic. And the Director General of the WHO said, firstly, when he announced COVID-19 to be a global disaster, and then when he announced it to be a pandemic, on both of those occasions, he took the opportunity to say that the poorest nations will be most greatly impacted by the pandemic. And of course, that's what we're seeing. So what I want to focus on is the need for health research and why that could make such a difference to how countries manage not just pandemics and disease outbreaks, but their everyday diseases of poverty. So why is it that countries aren't leading their own health research? What are the barriers? And of course, most importantly, what can be done? So we've been looking into this for quite a few years now. And I think what we can really conclude here is that there are multiple issues that hold back countries from doing research, but there are some generic things that can really make a difference and we can work together to try and address. So we've done quite a bit of work looking at what individual researchers, what governments, hospitals and policymakers perceive as the barriers to stop them leading research in their own countries, and ask them what they feel the solutions would be. There was a really key report out a few years ago called Microbes and Money, and I think it would be quite a good document for you all to look at. And obviously it's quite interesting looking at this now in the context of the pandemic, but we were asked to help with that. And this was led by the WHO and the World Bank and some others. And we were asked by these teams to look at what existing capacity existed at that point in time to do vaccine trials across the most poorest regions in the world, and what would be needed to change that. So we ran a huge survey, and we had over 5,000 responses, and it really told us that what was stopping research really taking off in many regions was that up until this point, and I think we're still in this situation, is that investment research often focuses on one individual and funds them to work on maybe one disease, and they build a team, and that grows for years and years, and you end up with these centres of excellence across the world, but they could be built around working on maybe just malaria, HIV, TB, and it's one PI who's got grant after grant, and they are fantastic, and they are the leaders in research across the world in many of these disease areas, and they should be congratulated and welcomed and championed. But the problem that leaves us is that these centres of excellence can be highly siloed. And if you go to many hospitals across the globe, you can walk into around the campus of the hospital, and you can see where there is these research centres of excellence, maybe shiny buildings with brand new Hiluxes outside, where they've done study after study. But you could go next door to the maternity ward or orthopaedics, and there may be no running water or electricity, and they've certainly never heard of a protocol and done research. And so you can have these centres of excellence, but they are too siloed, and they've been focused about one disease and one individual. And the problem has been that that excellence hasn't been spread even in their own healthcare facility, rather than this one team of excellence. And the trouble is that you can end up with these buildings being left standard and no research in them. And the two photographs in the slide are a HIV vaccine research facility that was set up probably about 15 years ago in Africa. And then that particular vaccine never came on board. And literally these buildings sat empty with the plastic covers on everything for about 5 years before they were taken into general use. So it's really important to think about research funding across diseases and across healthcare settings, not just focused on one disease or one individual. But we need to have the ability to train and build and keep lasting capable teams. And I'm going to keep coming back to that through this talk. So some of the things we found to be ubiquitous. Now, when we did this big research, we talked to healthcare workers, laboratory staff, students, hospital managers, policymakers, the whole gambit. And we asked them what they found difficult in running and leading studies. And we found that the answer didn't matter really about even what role they were in or what diseases they worked in. And we had these really common answers about the key areas that people found difficult. And so it's important to try and solve some of these problems by making it completely disease agnostic and putting in the basic support for running research, which might be how do you do community engagement, quality management and monitoring, setting up research labs, looking at research sample handling, writing a protocol, designing the question, all these ubiquitous common issues that you can solve in a cross-cutting way and actually spread the knowledge and the excellence into much wider healthcare settings than just the original research team. So when you ask these teams about what they found difficult, there was often this perception as well that research is too difficult and too expensive, and that a regulatory trial is something that foreigners come and do. And research isn't for me, it's for senior clinicians and doctors. And we hear this time and time again. You can, I've been given workshops in Brazil, Peru, Madagascar, across Africa, many countries across Asia. And you have a group of people in the room and you ask them, what is research? And they'll say it's a vaccine trial that people from overseas come and do, or it's a clinical trial that it's a few doctors in this place do. But actually research should be measuring what's in front of you. Research should be built into healthcare delivery and shouldn't be limited to expensive drug and vaccine trials, which of course we need, but that isn't just what research is. People often say as well that they find it operationally and institutionally difficult to initiate research, that there's a perception that good clinical practice is very difficult and expensive, and it's difficult to apply to every type of healthcare setting. It's also, there's an access issue, and there's a lack of ability to find training and support to run research, whether it's any type of research at all, not just clinical trials, but doing observational studies, lab-based work, or really important social science and anthropology studies. and that at the institution that people work in really don't recognise the value of research in that setting. And so there's no encouragement and mandate from up within that institution for lab staff or clinicians, nurses, to spend time doing research within their job. So we found that research happens well, but in discrete silos in many places. And these centres of excellence are world class, but they're limited often to one disease. And that expertise doesn't really spread beyond that one team and group. And so we need to change that approach, and we need to think about how can we present research as part of healthcare delivery across the board, so that every healthcare practitioner can be trained as a researcher, and that health research isn't just limited to clinical trials, but actually there's a whole range of research that's needed. We also need to think about health research in a completely different way than we have before, because research is evolving really fast, actually. And before, perhaps we used to think about research as perhaps the district level surveillance studies, observational studies to characterize a disease, then phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and even phase 4 clinical trials. But what we're seeing in many sectors, and maybe oncology is a good example, is that we've got a much more adapted and fluid approach to how clinical research happens. And we've certainly seen that in the disease outbreaks, which I'll come back to later. And so the differentiation between phase 1, 2, and 3 studies, and even the pre-clinical trial stage, where we've got observational research, and the all-important studies around that, like social science, anthropology, and lab-based work, maybe vector biology, it shouldn't be seen as completely discrete and separate entities, but in fact, research is a whole ecosystem, and we can move in a much agile way between all those different types of data. So just come out, maybe getting towards the other end of this pandemic, and we're looking at what's happened and where the research really did well and where we've got gaps that we still need to fill. And we hear a lot everywhere about pandemic preparedness, and having seen all sorts of investment into pandemic preparedness, almost every government in the world, I think, is clamoring to set up a pandemic preparedness centre. In my view, if we talk about pandemic preparedness, it's almost an oxymoron, meaning that if you're preparing for a pandemic, it's too late. We need to actually prepare for the stage before a pandemic, and that is spotting a new outbreak when it emerges. And if we want to spot a new outbreak wherever it emerges, then there needs to be research in place in that setting. Otherwise, they won't even be able to spot a new emerging pathogen, let alone work to stop it. And so in my view, if we can think about tackling research capacity gaps around the globe and have research in place tackling everyday diseases that happen in a community with all these sorts of types of research that we need, then every community will be in a much better place, because they have competent research teams working every day tackling whatever it is that they need to. And then those same teams will be able to realize that there's an emergent new pathogen, characterize it, work out what's going on, and then they'll be in place to stop that pandemic. But meanwhile, they'll be tackling the everyday diseases that go on in that community. And I think that's really important, to not differentiate between a pandemic response, infectious disease outbreaks, and actually the ongoing need for research equity across the globe, which is so desperately lacking. So what did we learn from the other outbreaks that we've seen in the past? That cycle I showed you earlier of all those different types of research that are needed to be answered all at once in an outbreak. So if we think about a disease like malaria or tuberculosis, or maybe even looking at oncology, in any type of disease, we need to understand what's causing the disease. Is it an infectious disease, or is it a non-communicable disease? What is causing the disease in the patient? How is it impacting the health? What are the symptoms? How is it acquired? What are the risk factors? And then how to treat and manage that disease. And then we might need to think about how to do public health prevention, laboratory diagnostics, all those elements around it that are needed, maybe to change behavior, maybe to diagnose the disease, maybe to understand if the interventions are working. So you can see how we need that whole cycle of research. The difference is, in a disease outbreak, is that those answers are needed all at once. But my point again is actually all those different skills to answer all those different questions really don't matter, and they don't differ very much between whether it's an infectious disease or a chronic long-term disease. Those basic building blocks are things we need to understand are largely similar. And so if we teach those skills and share resources on how to do those, then we can manage everyday diseases of poverty much better and adapt really quickly, pivot those experiences and skills and act very quickly in the face of a new outbreak. What we've been doing at the Global Health Network is we've built this large platform to really try and bring different groups together to really drive this change. And so we run this huge community of practice where on one side we bring together all these different groups who might be working on different diseases, or they might be working on a different research topic. So there's a community that's looking at research ethics. There's another that looks at research laboratories, or it might be a whole study group working on, say, something like Zika or dengue or oncology, mental health disease. And they can all operate within their own area on this platform, but they can share tools, resources, skills between each group on there. And on the other side, we offer research skills training and access to tools, resources, and guidance. So people can access a protocol, they can access a template consent form, maybe an SOP. And that SOP might have been written for a malaria trial, but if you're working in Nepal, say, as well, or in Peru, you can take a consent form that was developed in your region and you can adapt it for your disease area. Or equally, if you're working on malaria in Uganda, you can take a malaria guidance document and adapt it to your setting in Nepal. And so the point is trying to share information, resources and tools between disease areas, regions, roles and teams. And we also put a huge focus on languages as well. And we really try and make sure that lots of our content is translated so that it can be shared between different regions and roles across the globe. And we've got many of these communities of practice now, all uploading and sharing their documents, and that they've been downloaded hundreds of thousands of times. And the research skills training that we have on the platform covers all of those basic topics on how to set your question, to design your study, to implement it in your setting, and then how to share your results so that your findings are taken into practice. And then all of these templates, tools and resources can be downloaded and shared, and they can be adapted, but then they can be posted back up again. And so it's a nice iterative cycle, and it just enables different research teams to just save so much time really by accessing good practice from other groups and learning from excellence. And so this is trying to make it much faster to set up a really good study and learn from other people. Coming back to COVID-19, we really saw that the hardest hitting impact was, of course, in the areas of poverty, just as Tedros from the WHO foresaw. And so we really need to work here to think about what impact we could do to change this, and understanding and doing research right at the outset in those communities and making some of these changes. Just a couple of examples. This is where you can see how many more malaria deaths have been predicted in these regions, just based on how many estimated million deaths of people if you just held back from delivering any of the malaria interventions over a few years. Just the large impact and knock-on effect this will have for malaria cases. So this is looking at decades of research progress being potentially reversed by the impact of the pandemic. And so it's all the more important to try and make sure we don't neglect these regions, and we really kick back in with a huge research effort across all diseases. Tuberculosis is another disease that's just prevalent, obviously, across the whole globe. And there was a prediction, this WHO data from last year, that predicted the number of additional cases and lives lost just for the impact of the pandemic. So with the Zika outbreak, did we learn from Zika and Ebola, did we really learn for COVID about how to really implement research straight away? And the old adage is that 90% of the world's research benefits just 10% of the population. The problem we have there is that those areas of gaps where we don't have research is where the most deprived communities exist. And so trying to get research findings that benefit them and tackle this inequity is really difficult. And we still have seen in COVID that we've ended up with quite siloed and competitive programs, all focusing on really probably far too few areas of research, even in COVID. So we've got lots of gaps in our knowledge about the impacts of COVID in different types of populations in different regions of the world. So we need to make sure that we don't silo where the funding goes, and we really shift the dial on this so that we move away from those, siloed centres of excellence and try and increase the research capacity in places where there's no research now. So how do we do that? How can we make sure that research is in place everywhere, and that we have funding and research activities where they're missing? It's not easy, and I think we need to work together to address this. How do we galvanise healthcare workers, hospitals, policymakers, local governments to really champion research in their healthcare settings? People need to come forward and take on research within their roles, but the funders also have some work to do in how to make sure that funding is allocated really fairly. And if we don't do this, then we're not going to have those capacities everywhere, and this will cause dangerous delay. So if we think about research as a cycle and all these different types of research, when funders are planning what sort of studies they're going to invest into, they should really think about every single type of research study and the whole process of setting up research, and that we need all these different types of research funded, but then we need all these different types of skills in place in our research team. And it's only that way we'll be able to cover the whole research cycle and also the whole ecosystem of different types of research that we need. So I've got two solutions really. And I think this is why it would be really great to discuss these in more detail and maybe really talk about these with some of the teams attending this meeting. I think that if we really want to stop the next emergent pathogen, but really carry on working on existing everyday diseases, we need research capacity everywhere that can pivot. And this research can be put in place tackling everyday diseases that happen in those communities. And that means training teams in every aspect of health research. And if we can put in these capacity building efforts, then they'll be there and in place. And it's not difficult, and it just needs that different way of thinking from focusing on one disease or one team. My second solution is to think about team science. And I really think this has been such a massive barrier to spreading that expertise beyond single silos of excellence. How do we enable new groups to come through and new champions to be developed? I think, and this is probably the controversial bit of this talk, is that we need to move away from the PI model and the single centre that is leading a multiple grant application and a collaboration. Most funders will fund a PI, the principal investigator, and it goes to a lead organisation. But that's really difficult to really truly encourage federated, true equitable partnerships. So I think funders need to move away from that model, and also publishers away from the single, first and last author competition that there is in papers. So what can we all do to encourage team science and really have a whole team rewarded? Not just the teams at the top level that come in for a partnership, but everybody working on the research and who's in the team. The nurses, the doctors, the pharmacists, the lab workers, the community workers, and also the community teams that we need to have in place in the community that are working with the research teams. So how do we make sure everybody's recognised and that it's much easier to compete internationally to win those grants and take part? So that's my talk today. I hope that's really helped give everybody something to think about how we introduce better approaches to research capacity development across the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Trudy Lang, for another powerful talk. I think there couldn't have been a better conclusion to the set of talks that we had today. Our focus today is going to be about capacity building for research and the crucial role of team science, people within Pakistan talking to each other, and us acting collaboratively as stakeholders. In the interest of time, I'll move quickly to our declaration points. These have been discussed a little bit amongst the panelists earlier. So there is some agreement on the themes that have emerged, and our talks today have also echoed the same thing. I'll just make a very quick mention of Ms. Shakira, the sister of Atika Anjum, the patient whose story I started this session off with. She has been kind enough to join us today for this session, and I'm truly grateful for her presence today. The real stakeholders in all this research enterprise are our patients and their wonderful families. So there is one missing representation, which is from pharmaceutical industry and CRO, and this is not a conscious decision. We in fact did invite somebody. We invited Professor Ahmed Atif Mirza. He was somebody who had worked with GSK and was now also leading a national contract research organization. He unfortunately passed away about a few weeks back due to complications of COVID-19. So a great loss of human life, and also a reminder that this pandemic has affected us in that way as well. We have lost people who are crucial stakeholders to the research enterprise. So moving on to our clinical trials declaration, it's important to firstly realize that this declaration is not a call to action to some arbitrary person or Dr. Faisal for that matter. We are all making this call to action together as stakeholders, because we feel that whatever needs to change for clinical trials and research in the country, that change will come from us, from within us. So the call to action is to all of us as duty bearers and as stakeholders. And I'm sure everyone would agree that regulators and people from the Ministry of Health, researchers, as well as research administrators, bioethicists, we are all duty bearers and stakeholders in this discussion. And our patients are also a very important participants in that. This is something that Dr. Naila had also highlighted. The themes that have emerged today is firstly the importance of regulatory harmonization and standardization. I'll start distributing comments amongst the speakers. I would request Dr. Saima Parvez Iqbal to talk a little bit about that. The second theme that has emerged is the importance of clinical trial societies and consortia, because single institutions, siloed clinical trial activity units will not help further the cause of research in the country, and institutions that already have well-placed systems need to work on that. And I would request Professor Saeed Hamid and Naila Begin-Sadi to talk briefly to comment on that need. Finally, and most importantly, the role of infrastructure and capacity building for research. I would request Dr. Faisal Sultan to comment briefly on that, on how we can change that. And I think that a point that has been an underlying overarching theme has been the importance of local leadership and communication. I don't think we need to discuss that further, but I would like Professor Amir Jaffri to talk a little bit about the importance of running ethics with science while we make all these capacity developing initiatives. So I'll firstly start off with a request for comments from Professor Saima Parvez Iqbal. She's a professor of community medicine at Shifa International Hospital, and also the Iron Lady behind NBC ERC. So Dr. Saima, we'll start off with this, and then I'll come to Dr. Faisal.
All right, thank you, Mariam. If you could just, because there's a lot of things running in my mind right now. So what particularly did you want me to talk about in the next couple of minutes?
So learning from COVID-19 as well as your pre-COVID experience, how you feel harmonization and standardization of the review process for research in the country can be better streamlined.
Okay, thank you so much. So coming from our experience of the pre-pandemic era, and you talked about baseline research at that time. And baseline research even then was, I mean, as I said, we're not the greatest of researchers in Pakistan, and we need to realize that. And when COVID-19 happened, there was a mushrooming of researchers, there were a lot of funds, and people who did not have relevant backgrounds were coming in to do the research, and that was truly challenging for us. So we at the NBC, we talked about our rapid turnaround review process, but that did not mean that the institutional IRBs would not be running their own research process. So, just because the NBC approved a project did not mean that the local IRB should not be reviewing it independently. And just because NBC gave their stamp of approval did not mean that the local IRB could find fault in it. And I think Dr. Naila mentioned that in her presentation. So we were working independently, and we wanted the IRBs to work independently and critique a proposal as such. Talking about harmonization, yes, there is a need to harmonize the IRBs. As I said, we've had some issues with, because new research was developing at such a fast pace, we were having institutions making IRBs at short notice. People who may not have been qualified to review proposals were doing so, or just rubber stamping their approval. So that is another concern that we face. And I think a lot of what is going to follow is capacity building. And you're talking about research in silos, which is so true. And interestingly, all the good research or the good trial units are coming from private organizations. And we have seen that we've receiving proposals at the NBC level in which, there is collaboration with government institutions, but then during our meetings, we always question, private institutions like AKU are getting the funding, but the patients are all coming from the government institutions. So this is not to disparage the private institutions, but we need to work on developing capacity at the government institutions as well. So I think we need to move from private and go on into the public, and then again for capacity building for research. And
so I guess public-private partnership would probably
definitely
be the model moving forward. And for that, we would need more communication amongst these parties. Thank you so much. I'll next move on to Dr. Faisal Sultan to comment a little bit about the biggest overarching theme of this discussion, which is capacity building for research in Pakistan. I know he has focused on this in his talk as well, but in his opinion, what are the three crucial things we could do to change infrastructure and capacity building for research in the country?
Right. So first and foremost, I think to enable capacity building, or to enable capacity for research, one of the things that needs to be done, perhaps the first of all, is this is for research to actually have a head of account. In other words, it should be funded. For research it requires that there be a central entity that is able to evaluate research and find out what happened with that research money. I don't want to use the word dysfunctional, but it had become essentially added to be, and that was the PMRC, which turned into the PHRC, which now is part of the NIH as the Health Research Institute. So the whole idea is to actually have more funds centrally available for which people could compete. Once you have funding, people do line up. So that's one. Beyond money, the other thing that we need to be able to do is to make sure that at least we are fostering research. Having an NBC and having an ethical review process is crucially important. Obviously, you don't want to make this the Wild West of research. But at the same time, one does want that the idea of fostering research, of helping it along, be there. And to that extent, the presence of a modern and forward-looking health research institute, with an important component being the ethical review and the protection of human subjects and so on. So that is the second sort of pillar. The third bit, of course, is learning to do this. And I think learning to do this will come almost naturally and automatically once you've made, if I could use the word, a business case, a financial case for actually fostering research. Second is to unlock all the stops that exist. So actually to remove the stops, and that there I refer to the fostering of it and to helping it along. And then if at all required, then at a governmental level, but also very crucially at an institutional level. I think Professor Lang also referred to this, which is that those that are doing it and doing it well ought to be able to share what they know and not to keep it as a sort of a secret, a well-hidden secret or a well-hidden sauce, a recipe that just gets passed down generations or passed down into the institutions, but to actually spread the ability to do this. I'd say these station and through parking of money specifically for this. And the last is more a culture change and a change of approach. That too will happen once there is a clear signaling that the government wants to foster and fund health research. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. So essentially what the government plans to do is to provide money, managed centrally with an ownership regarding fostering research in the country. And I think that would make all the difference. I will now move on to brief comments from Professor Saeed Ahmed and Professor Naila Begansari regarding what they think especially for setting up research networks and consortia and their role in enhancing capacity building for good quality research in the country. We request brief comments from you both, focusing on these 2 points. I'll firstly request Professor Saeed Ahmed.
Thank you so much. I'm going to switch to Urdu a little bit in the middle, so please don't mind. Faisal Sultan साहब को आपने पैसे का कह के मुश्किल में डाल दिया है. I hope that he's able to generate enough funds for this. I don't think that should be the ambit and the wherewithal. पैसे का बंदोबस्त हम बाहर से ग्रांट से भी कर सकते हैं, वो सब कुछ कर सकते हैं. देखिए, I think the gist from what we hear and what we know is the fact that there are a lot of people who are interested in research. मैं आज DRAP की website देख रहा था. By the way, it's a very nicely organized website finally. और उसके अंदर आपको चीजें मिल जाती हैं. And if you look at the number of research clinical trial sites that are approved is quite large now. The funny part is that trial sites approved हुई हैं for single studies. Now, if a trial site is able to do one study, they're able to do other studies as well. So I don't understand the concept that TB के trial के लिए वो site approved हुई है. बाकी there's no blanket approval as it is for only 4 or 5 sites I could find जिसके अंदर एक blanket approval है और बाकियों के अंदर कोई approval किसी की गुंजाइश नहीं है. So I think ये चीजें हमें देखने की जरूरत है जो streamline करेंगी of bringing people together. Saima said, well, we need to engage the public hospitals. Of course, we need to engage public hospitals. But let me give you an example. JPMC का हमारे इतना बड़ा center है, big center, huge place, lots of rush. उसका पता क्या approve हुआ? Ward 9 is approved for this particular study. Now, what is this? For goodness sake. या JPMC approved है या फिर कुछ भी approved नहीं. I mean, Ward 9 is not separate to JPMC. So I think those are some little tiddly bits that I think we need to sort out in the system when we bring people together. My second point would be, yes, we need a platform where we bring all the stakeholders together. हम उसमें regulatory को भी लाएं, हम pharmacists को भी लाएं, हम technicians को भी लाएं, हम research associates को भी लाएं, etc. etc. And what we've been proposing and we've been discussing with Mariam also, कि हमें एक clinical trials platform बनाना चाहिए, and we should organize a meeting of this clinical trials platform, whatever we call it. We don't want to call it a society or an association, क्योंकि फिर उसके अंदर फिर वो function आ जाता है कि president कौन है और general secretary कौन है और ये कौन है और वो कौन है. We don't want that. We want a functioning system that supports research in the country, and let's try and do this sometime next year. Your declaration would be helpful in this regard. So here I will stop and hand over to Naila.
Thank you. आपने तो सारी चीजें बोल दी हैं. But one of the things that I wanted to also add is that, like you said, this Ward 9 of JPMC, there's no one to guide us, right? And the notion is that there's many institutes who are doing really well. I don't consider Indus an institution that knows what's going on. I think we've been winging it, and we've been winging it really well. And for instance, Professor Simon ne kaha कि mechanism of reaching out to the NBC nahi hai. So if NBC is doing they're doing a approval, and the site also has the power, हमें किसी ने ये नहीं बताया. And rather we've been told that no, I don't, NBC has done it, so what are you nitpicking about, right? So how do we reach out to the NBC? We have no idea how to reach out to the NBC because there's so many players who are as confused, just making it a very difficult process. So I think one of those things. The other thing is that when we do reach out to public institutions, they're suspicious of us. They're like, what is it in it for you? What is it in it for me? आप क्या देंगे, मैं क्या दूंगी? Grumble, grumble, grumble. पैसे नहीं है आपके पास, तो ये है. भाई हमारे पास कुछ भी नहीं है. हम तो एक container में काम कर रहे हैं. So we're just as bad as you, right? Except the fact is, perhaps we're more professional in the way we are sort of portraying ourselves. So हम सब उसी पानी में हैं, and we really need to work together. This is why, I mean, I think kudos to Mariam for setting this up, for bringing all these wonderful speakers. All of us, we are all like-minded people, and we should be able to make a difference. So I think I've said my 2 bits.
Thank you so much, Dr. Naila. I think we are now reduced to actually a single theme, which is that we need to talk to each other, and we need to talk to each other regularly, because it seems that there are many things that are lost in translation, despite many people doing lots of good work. For my final comment, I will request Professor Amir Jaffri, because we talk, this is a bioethics session. We have been talking about fostering research, that fostering has to ensure that research is good quality also. So how can we make sure that while we move through this transition and learn to talk better to each other, that ethics and science have a marriage and they're not seen as adversaries?
Thank you, Mariam. You just took the words out of my mouth. This is a marriage not exactly made in heaven. ये partnership जो है ये बड़ी मुश्किल है. Because one partner, जिस तरह से ethics की बारी आती है, टाइम खत्म हो चुका होता है. So that's the thing with research also. By the time the project gets into the ethics section, which is going through the NBC or going through the ERC and then NBC DRAP, etc., 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 बहुत से a lot of time has passed. So we need to actually marry these together and to have them accepting each other. Research पढ़ाई जाती है, research ethics नहीं पढ़ाई जाती है. If you look at the way research is taught in various institutions, it is being taught as a subject, as an important part of your curriculum in medical schools. But research ethics may be a 1-hour lecture. So that has to change. A dialogue between researchers and ethicists has to also start developing at that level also. So having said that, we still at this point do not know, as we were talking about silos of excellence, and of course other areas which are not as excellent. And Professor Saeed Amir ne bahut achhi baat kahi that there are now so many centers which are recognized as research centers. It is amazing to see institutions, and I will just limit myself to this particular area, institutions being recognized which have absolutely no background in ever having done any kind of research ever, which are now clinical trial sites. So unko blanket pe aapko de rahe, there must be some other reason for. They're not going into research for generation of knowledge. They're going into research for generation of something else. And I'll limit myself to that comment. The other thing that I want to talk about is that while ethics is important, we talk about ethics, and it is important that we are talking in this forum. It also needs to be patronized. We have had a change from the NBC from being housed under PHRC now to the Health Research Institute. But so far, it has only been a change of address and nothing else. Same lack of support from the secretarial staff, and same lack of organization. It is only the members who actually get around to organizing things, and the Iron Lady you've already mentioned. But it will run out of steam. These few individuals doing meetings every week at 10 p.m. or actually nowadays at 10:30 p.m. after the match is over will only last so long. We've been doing this for the past 2 years with no acknowledgement and a lot of pressures from various other quarters also for various different reasons. This cannot last. So we require support, not just verbal support, but actual support in the form of a secretariat that actually works, and revitalization of the NBC itself, which technically has outlived its mandate. The REC is working because it's got the Iron Lady and mad people are behind her, but that cannot be a solution in the long term. So we need to think of these things also in the long term. I'll stop over here.
Thank you very much. With this, we have come to the last minute of our session. I think this has been a very fruitful discussion, and we have come up with some really good action points. This draft declaration will continue to be circulated amongst all identified stakeholders, and we will continue this discussion. And I cannot thank all of you enough who have joined us today, including Dr. Faisal Sultan and all the panelists and speakers. It has been wonderful talking to you all, as well as all the close to 90 attendees who have bared us for last 120 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you.